Hello everybody, and welcome to the RTS Future of Shows webinar. Thanks very much for joining us today. We're hosting this from RTS Thames Valley, and I'm Penny Westlake. So just a little bit of context to start with. Back in February, March, many people in the broadcast and media industry were busy planning for the 2020 NAB show in Las Vegas, the production and technology show in London, and technology vendors had marketing plans and product development schedules mapped out, and all around the dates of the major shows. Conference papers were being prepared and practiced. Then, lockdown. And it quickly became apparent that wherever you were in the world, no shows for 2020. Some were predicting that this would be the end for shows. In the last few weeks, NAB and IBC have published show dates for 2021, and Satis in Paris is still planning to go ahead in November. However, just today it was announced that CES 2021, which was scheduled for January, would not be going ahead. So today we will be looking at the ins and outs of the future of shows, with particular reference to the media industry. And I'd like to welcome and introduce our panel, who have kindly given their time to join the discussion today. So, without further ado, I'll ask them to just say hello so they come up on the screen. Firstly, we have with us Darren Wolfson of Molyneux.
Hi. Hi there.
Hi, Darren. We also have Abby Parcel of Boxer Systems.
Hello.
Hi, Abby.
Hi.
Kieran Doran of Roden Schwartz, and of course Pixel Power.
Hi, everyone.
MC Patel of Emotion Systems.
Hi, everyone.
And also Mark Birchall of Trade Fair.
Hello, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Mark. So we'll move on now because we've got some sort of questions just to sort of get things going. But of course, I'm happy for the panel to divert from that if so they want to. So if I could possibly kick off with you, Mark, since you're there. Perhaps you can ask me, firstly, we should perhaps define what do you as panelists define as shows? Are they exhibitions, conferences, other gatherings? What do we mean by shows as they maybe were?
I think as a UK pavilion organiser, the events for the media sector have always been a place where companies can promote their products and services to a targeted audience, attend the conferences. It's to see some thought leadership. It's a platform where companies can meet new and existing clients. They can use the event to launch products, research the status of the market, research the status of the industry. And part of that is easily done by obviously the networking that's available during the show, those impromptu meetings that happen in the coffee queue or in the bar. But also it's an opportunity to entertain your client base or potential client bases, clients that are actually attending the show. So lots of important areas for all companies. Doesn't really matter what the size of that company is, but it's a gathering of many people from the industry in various different markets to allow us to spread the word about what our products and services are doing and meet like-minded professionals from the industry.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Abby, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, pretty much what Mark said.
Yeah, he covered a lot of ground there, didn't he?
Exactly. I would say that there's a few. Boxer are a reseller, so we represent a lot of different suppliers. So we do hold some of our own events as well. So for our own customers, so we have something called Box Fest that we do every year. which is a technology day where we are able to show what we have on offer with regards to a trend that we've seen. It usually follows NAB, and what trends we have seen there is it's usually quite a conceptual show. So yeah, I'd also put that, any sort of gathering of that size, road shows as well. So also things that are a bit more sort of local to some of the regions in the UK as well.
Yes, anybody else on the panel like to jump in and just add to the listings of things?
I guess as a buyer rather than a seller, at most of the shows I go to, I've actually, irrelevant of COVID, I think they have become less and less relevant over the years. And you sort of look to the conference program a bit more, see if there's anything there that interests you, and specifically their networking events. I think it's an opportunity to get lots of like-minded people together. And for me, certainly the focus on the gear being shown, because there is far less gear being shown. It's mostly software, and you mostly have an opportunity to see it in other, often better ways. It's far less about the kit, I think, these days.
Yeah, I'd completely agree with that. If you look at the shows that we did 20, 30 years ago, my first show was at IBC when it was in Brighton, and it got so big that Sony's pavilion was on the beach. And in those 25 or so years, it's changed dramatically. There's a lot less hardware equipment. It's much more a networking show. And I was going to make the point that whilst it's a networking show, that networking show doesn't happen always at the show. And we mentioned the bars and the networking throughout the places and the corridors. But actually, I think as Brits heading out from London, the pure Virgin staff and BA staff, that tends to be the place that everybody has to cope with the whole industry meeting on the day or the 2 days before getting out to Las Vegas or even Amsterdam. And you do tend to meet everybody and meet up and connect like that. Software is the way it's all going. And it's interesting how we all think that it's moving away from a hardware show to a software show to a networking event. And Darren, you say that it's becoming less relevant in some ways, but for manufacturers, actually it's where we find out where our customer base is thinking, what they're thinking of, what their projects are, what their problems are, what their workflows problems are. And it's actually quite hard, we're finding, to do that without getting those chances to meet face-to-face. And you'll see behind me this program that we've set up called Showtime, which is a little bit like what you mentioned, Abby. We've had individual events around the world over the years. We've never particularly branded them as such. We've just done different things in different regions and met with customers. And we felt now is the time that we need to set up not quite our own IBC or NEB, but our own theme, which allows people to recognize that when we're doing an event online, it's a closed or a coordinated event. But it is quite tough without the ability to be able to meet people face to face.
So for me, shows, again, I go back a long way. My first trade show was 1976, and it was at the Grosvenor Hotel where there was IBC. Now,
you're admitting this, MC.
So the thing there is it started off as a conference that was funded by a few exhibitors showing their equipment. What is turned now is that the conference is there. I never get a chance to see it because I'm too busy working. And the shows have grown really large now. And the original idea of networking and meeting people and all the rest of it is being lost now, I feel. I mean, for the last few years, the trade shows are way too large. The people you want to see are also trying to see other people, and they're spending less time there. So in a way, I mean, if we go back to what is a show, the definition has changed. The show organizers would tell you you're going there to sell, but actually you're going there to fund a very expensive IBC conference or an NAB conference where somebody from Microsoft is paid to talk to you about stuff. Now, I agree, though, Darren, when you said, it's the hardware. I mean, 20 years ago, people whip around the big stands to see what the new thing was. Then they find a little company in a corner that was doing something interesting. And you gather in a bar to talk about it later. And you bumped into a a lot of people. That's no longer true now. There's 90,000 people there, and the dynamics have changed. And I also agree. We sell software, so we can do one-on-one online or physically go meet them. We don't have to cart anything around. They can do a trial on their premises, on their material. So I think the future of shows is it has to change. We may have some triggers recently, but it has to change.
Yeah, I think what seems to be coming out of, what various people have been saying is that the networking and possibly the happy accidents meetings, those kind of things, are had become almost the most valuable things with these shows, over and above the traditional, here's a product, please buy it. Do you think that those sort of meetings and possible accidental things are the most valuable thing? Something nobody, I think, mentioned was the interaction between different manufacturers, which I think might have become quite increasingly important with the advent of everything being software, or a lot of it certainly.
And that's one of the reasons we kept pushing to keep the 5th day on IBC, because although it's a shorter day, and I know it's not for everybody, it's a day when the system integrators or the partner vendors or the chip manufacturers and people like that and us can meet, whereas the first 4 days you're meeting with customers. But talking about raising another point that you mentioned there, Penny, about the what a show entails, I think there's multiple things that it entails. There's an old phrase in the American West, like there's nothing like a hanging to concentrate the mind. And a show is a deadline. IBC would open at 10:30 on Friday, the 11th of September. And if we made an announcement that we were going to actually show such and such a feature, the development engineers have a gun to their head. They've got to do that.
You've touched on a point that I've thought for many years, that it's an immovable deadline.
It's an immovable deadline. And it's actually, those two big periods in April and September are two rhythmic periods which actually forced sales to start talking to or listening to customers. It forces the marketing group to make sure that there's a proper campaign so that people can understand what we're actually doing. And it also has another effect inside the organization in terms of getting features and functionality ready on a certain time. And without that, I guess there's a fear in the industry things will drift.
I would respectfully disagree. I agree that traditionally there was a launch, which was, when I worked at Discrete, NAB, you showed the new features, IBC, you made the release because it took 6 months to debug. But then there's this thing called agile development, and agile is short steps, fail fast, fail quickly, fix stuff. And so if you're really waiting for 6 months to do a release, you're in trouble. And we have deadlines. They're called customers. So if customers don't launch projects at trade shows, so very often we'll say somebody's saying, I need this by February or March or whenever. So again, it's the reactiveness that we have to build in. And I think I'm not speaking of a lot of companies are now looking at this agility. So you're continuously in marketing mode and you're continuously in sales mode, and R&D are delivering all the time in little chunks. Now, that's where, new product thunder is now, in fact, the other thing with new products is you get drowned at IBC or NAB if you're launching a new product because there's 1,200 exhibitors. Now, I don't mean to be negative. We do go to the shows. We do get some value out of it, but they're no longer the center of gravity for us, for marketing.
And for me too, you see, because it's interesting what you're saying. I think there was a time, perhaps, 15 years ago, where typically all the sales guys, the resellers would ring you up before a big exhibition. They'd make appointments with you. You'd go there. You'd go to see them. It felt like there was some purpose or point to that. I think now the only reason I find myself making appointments with people I know before I go out is to just build a certain level of discipline into my trip and create at least some sort of order to it. I think really it's all the bits you intersperse with. So it's moving from one meeting to another that causes you to walk past other exhibitors in the hall. I think that's very helpful. I think time in between meetings where you meet other people and, you know, the networking stuff we talked about, that's really essential. I think the idea of going to see anyone to hear them tell you about their product launch, I think I don't think that's relevant at all anymore. I think any manufacturer worth its salt would have told you beforehand anyway. And if for any reason they didn't see you at the show, they would tell you afterwards. So, I think it must be extremely difficult, particularly for big manufacturers. I think for small companies, you can take one of the little side booths where it doesn't have to cost them a fortune. They don't have to send out huge numbers of staff. I can see how it works well for them. If you're a Sony, an Avid, even a Roden Schwartz, dare I say, you know, the cost of that stand and all the people you send out there, it must be incredibly difficult to justify these days.
Well, actually, it's the same for the smaller companies to justify. If you do the cost per lead, qualified lead, and the amount of money you spend, and then you compare that with a webinar, for example, it makes, I have some statistics that I won't bore people with, but I'm happy to share offline, where we did mailers to ask people, are you going or are you not going? And then we looked at who was not going and who was going. A lot of the people who were going were mates of mine that responded to the email. A lot of the people who weren't going were people who bought from me. And the other thing, Darren, is that you're what I would call a high-profile customer. So I don't know if you spend the whole show or not, but a lot of them don't. If I were to call you for an appointment, a typical answer I get is, hey, MC, why don't you just call us and see us at Pinewood, because I'd be busy doing other stuff. And that's not disrespectful or anything. They're just sitting there saying, I want to talk to you, but I'll be bogged down in other stuff there. So some of our views are based on who we are, what size we are, what our budget is, and what impact we can make there is. But we still go there because all the people, or a lot of the people we want to talk to, are there in that little area, and we have to find a way of hunting them down and getting attention from them.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well with it's also a good position for the customers to then speak to the suppliers as well. I think if you think of a lot of our suppliers are US based, and so when they come over, they bring a lot of their sort of management over. I know that, you know, a few years ago with the DPP initiative, that was only ever going to be rolled out in the UK. So it allowed us to have some weight, really, rather than it being an email to our suppliers saying, UK have got this initiative for all the broadcasters, please certify yourself and spend some money into something that's only going to be UK focused and UK applied. It allowed us to show through our customers what was needed. So I'd say that was definitely, we wouldn't have been able to get such a quick answer of a yes and to get certified from our suppliers.
It's interesting though, because I think the resellers perform really quite an important function, particularly at the very large exhibitions, because whoever your favorite reseller of choice is, whoever you have your relationships with, they can broker certain meetings for you. They can introduce you to things. I mean, I guess it's their value is sourcing all of the stuff there and identifying, because they have knowledge of their customers, what might be of interest to them. So that when you are on the floor, when you are actually going to visit manufacturers, that they're relevant meetings. So I think the resellers do play a very important part.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, like you said, Darren, it's a lot of people do have to move quite a lot and work their way around huge halls. A lot of people have to justify themselves being at trade shows now with a project in mind. So it's not quite often I will be speaking to a customer. I've got an agenda already in place, you know, they've told me they've got an hour. But then that day I meet up with them, and when we walk into a stand, find out that the project has changed. It's suddenly on-prem when it was meant to be in the cloud. And then suddenly I have to sort of rejig in my mind and make the most out of that hour still. And I would still say that at a trade show, you get the best out of it. You get a lot more mindset really from people, where they can see it in action. Whereas one-to-one with demos is a lot easier.
Here's something we discovered, which talks to a couple of points that you mentioned, Darren. Yeah, budgets for trade shows eat a huge hole in your cost and your profit. And I think 10, 15 years ago, IABM did some studies where it showed that most of the manufacturers in the broadcasting industry were spending about 80% of their marketing budget on 2 or maybe 3 of the major shows, which was a bit obscene, really. And they can eat up a huge amount of money. And so as a marketer, you're generally trying to make sure that you're being efficient. You're trying to squeeze the cost, squeeze the floor space, squeeze the best value out of everything so that you reduce that cost. Because every dollar or euro that you spend on a marketing requires another 50 for sales to bring in just in revenue, or even more, maybe even double that. But one of the things that we've discovered in this program of Showtime that we've launched was the ability to be able to reach people we wouldn't have met. So there's not everybody gets the ticket to Amsterdam, not everybody gets the ticket to Las Vegas. And what we've discovered is that 2 particular things. One is that the customers that we get to talk to can bring colleagues who previously wouldn't have been able to get to the actual event itself, which is wonderful. We get more, maybe 10 or 15 people onto a call where we can actually do live demos. And the second thing that what we've discovered is that we're not as pressurized. When you take the 100 or so or 200 demos that you might have done in a few days, and you actually space them out over the period of a month or 6 weeks, you end up creating a meeting which is an hour and a half, 2 hours, and it being a lot more leisurely because there's less pressure on our customers to actually get in, get off to the next one, get down to hall 7 from hall 9 and working out the distance. And whilst the networking thing is great, and I think we do miss this, and we'll all miss this, we'll get back to it somehow. Maybe I think we'll get back to it with some of the smaller shows, and that's something we should talk about as well, because whilst IBC and NAB, the big shows in our face, have been cancelled, there's a lot of smaller events that have been cancelled. But I think actually, secretly, I think the smaller events have got a better opportunity of coming back in a quicker, sooner way, because they're probably going to have a better opportunity at making sure there's more social distancing than some of the bigger shows. But let's wait and see.
Yeah, if I could ask as well, some people have commented to me during lockdown that there's been a complete proliferation of webinars and invites and everything. Everybody's inbox is completely stuffed with these things. How do you think smaller new companies who perhaps don't, are trying to break into a market and don't have an existing customer base, how do you think they can use things with digital marketing rather than shows? How can people who are just trying to start up get their heads above the noise?
Well, I think that I've spoke to a lot of people, companies throughout lockdown, and they've been a bit overwhelmed by the number of webinars and number of different various companies trying to sell them digital packages, and who do they turn to, who do they use? I think we're seeing a lot of events moving over to a virtual platform, and I believe that if you look at shows like Broadcast Asia that's moved to a virtual platform, if you're a new company to Southeast Asia and you're wanting to start promoting your products and services, they're a trusted organizer that have been running that show for a number of years. They have good contacts. They are able to invite those contacts to the virtual platform. And I think that will be a good starting place for a lot of those small companies in the current environment. It won't replace the physical event per se, but in the current situation, there's really not a lot of other options for companies, not a lot of trusted options out there for people. There's lots of options, but which one do they choose? And some of those, I would say that the packages that they're offering at Broadcast Asia are a reasonable price for what they are. I think the actual platform is what I would call a true virtual platform. It's not a website with some videos on. It's actually got some interaction there. So if I was a small company, and I work with a lot of those small companies, I would be advising them to really look at the major events in the markets that they want to and see what they're doing. You know, in the UK, recently they've had COGX. The COGX event had over 40,000 visitors to that event on a virtual platform, and also had a small virtual exhibition as well. So there are some excellent platforms out there for those startups and small companies to be able to get involved with.
I think the great thing about things like that, though, is that Broadcast Asia no longer becomes Broadcast Asia, it becomes Broadcast World.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that content, the wonderful thing about that content is that can be used elsewhere in the world from a manufacturer's perspective. And what I would rather hope is that from a customer's perspective, they get the chance actually, instead of the peak periods that we had in major trade shows, that it starts to smooth out and they can get more information more regularly all year round.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's obviously I think Broadcast Asia as an event will run real time for the 3 days. But as you quite rightly say, that content is there readily available for 7 months of the year. And actually it becomes quite cost effective if you are a small startup company.
So the only input I would put into something like, I think that's a great idea. The only thing we have to do is create some verticals so that there is better differentiation by subject matter or by product interest or so on. Because again, you don't want a cluster of 1,100 participants and then the customer has to wade through some idea. Now, we recognized some years ago that the trade shows weren't really serving us as well as we'd like them to. It just by virtue of the size and budget, and as I said earlier, how much time people are spending, how much attention would they give to a smaller company. So small companies have to struggle. So what we have done, and we look to extend this, is we started by targeting the 80-20 rule. We'll see the top 10 customers in every country and try and visit them personally. And ironically, it can work out quite cost effective. And once you know them, then you don't need a trade show to see them. You could make appointments online and so on. So if you want to recreate a networking environment, then for example, we do file-based audio. If there are interest groups or verticals, so it's saying if you're doing file-based processing, here's 20 companies, you can channel that interest. And then the platform becomes valuable by virtue of its ability to reach a large subscriber base. What's happened with the bigger shows for us is a large subscriber base is increasingly isolated from the little companies. So the numbers are large, but they don't mean a damn thing to us because they're nothing to do with us. So if you're going to do anything, what we have to do is look at that diversity of technology and services that we provide and try and break them into little clusters. And it's great that you could visit them any time of the year you like, because that's exactly what you want. You don't want a 4-day event where you're trying to cram.
So,
11. Sorry,
that's all right. Perhaps I can ask Darren if what, from a sort of customer perspective, what he thinks on the idea of these platforms and subject groups and things, because it must be quite. I mean, I know my inbox has been completely swamped with invitations to webinars, and I can only imagine what it's like for him.
I think theoretically it's a great idea, and I guess what choice do people have if they can't meet in the environments they're used to? Everyone is attempting to evolve. I have to say though, from my point of view, it's not really attractive at all. I think the thing that the date and geography of a big exhibition does is it forces focus. It forces you and possibly a colleague of yours to step outside of your normal environment to somewhere else and carve out time for the purpose of research in whatever form that ends up being. The problem with webinars is they sit within your normal day. You're going to go online and then you think, oh, actually it's being recorded, I could watch it later. And then later you could think, actually, I'm not going to bother at all. They're generally speaking really dull. I mean, it'd be interesting, to hear from the participants of this particular session, whether any of them actually find any of this interesting or whether it's just dull. And because there's none of this interaction that you get when you stand in front of another person and have proper dialogue and conversation, it's just not as good. And I tend to find, you sat at your desk, you've got a particular problem you want to solve, so you go do the research there and then, see if you can solve it. And you may talk to other people, you may go on the web, you may look for solutions. It may take you to one of these sessions, pre-recorded things. You'll try and, as quickly as possible, get the gist. Probably not going to want to sit through any more than 4 or 5 minutes of anything. And unfortunately, that's, I suspect, a view shared by quite a lot of people.
I've definitely found that. I mean, yeah, we're in the broadcast industry, and yet some of the production standards of some webinars have been absolutely atrocious. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it.
What are you telling me, Abby?
Not this one, of course. But yeah, some of them where there's been, they're trying to sell audio equipment and you can't actually hear them on their webinars and things like that. It's just, it's extraordinary, even things where you're showing how to remotely look at something, how they can remotely view as if they're in the office, as if they're in the post house. And then they haven't even looked at the Zoom refresh rate. So it actually looks atrocious what they're trying to sell. So yeah, although it's helped in a crisis where we weren't expecting to be in this position, it's also had some major pitfalls. Major.
It's interesting because with webinars, we do recorded webinars and we do live webinars, and I spend half my life telling people that when you look at a camera, I'm actually really happy right now. You can tell that I'm really happy, can't you? No, do that, please. Just smile to the camera, folks. These people you're trying to engage with them, don't bore the pants off them before you've even got through 5 seconds. And so, yeah, I think a lot of us are zoomed out and webinared out. And I keep going back to this Showtime thing only because it's a name, but it's more, what's more important, I think, for us is less the webinars and more the one-to-ones. So actually getting on the phone with the customer. And we've had customers where you've had 5 or 10 participants. A few of them have got joined on video, a few of them just joined without the video, and a few phoned in from the car whilst they're on their way to to get to the meeting itself. But the more important thing about it is that it's us to that one customer. So you're doing what you would do when you invite the customer up to the booth and the team arrives and you get your demo person stood there ready to go and you deliver. And then we have a conversation. I think the 1 to hundreds on webinars, unless it's done really, really well and properly produced, then it's going to be boring.
Yeah, I think sort of timing is absolutely key. So we could have done Boxfest virtually. We decided not to. The essence was the networking side of it. But we did push on some of our short webinars, which we called Boxer Shorts. Hey. And so there were short snippets basically for, rather than usually at the end of a meeting quickly telling people what else is out there, 5 minutes, and then that can go into a further demo. That's what we've been doing recently.
So when we're thinking about shows, do we think it sounds to me like people generally on this webinar think there is a place for shows, or certainly for networking events. Now, obviously, we're a little dependent on what happens with the virus, but do you think that if shows come back, they will come back in a similar form to how they were as long ago as December last year, or do we think that they will be changed as a result of what people have seen and learned during the lockdowns?
Well, first of all, I think people's budgets are going to be very different than what they were. I don't think it's going to be a question of, right, we're all clear, events start again, and we click a switch and everything's back to normal. It's going to be very, very different. I think people who I've worked with over the years that have gone, from being small stands up to reasonable size stands may come back and take a smaller presence. I do think show organisers, if they're not speaking or looking into creating a hybrid event for the foreseeable future, I think are making a massive mistake, because again, I think when we do start to see things open up, there will be those companies, and as I say, I speak to them on a regular basis. There is a will from a lot of companies to get out to events, physical events, get out to market, but only if it's safe. And there will be those other companies, actually, even when it's deemed safe, either will be a little bit more cautious about whether they actually participate, and they'll want to look at other options of how they can be part of that event whilst not necessarily having to travel.
I think travel's going to present quite a big problem for a while. I mean, probably really until there's a vaccine, if there's a vaccine. Because the risks are quite large, aren't they? For a business to consider sending people abroad at the moment, there's the risk that they'll be forced to quarantine when they come home, although they didn't realise that when they were booking their trip. The fact that they could bring something back with them, infect people back in the office and cause just a wider problem within their own organisation. I think, it's going to be trying to establish what the value of the exhibitions against the risk associated with going is, at least for a little while. And I think if some of the companies you're hoping to see out there, because of the budgetary constraints you were just talking about, decide perhaps not to exhibit, and a couple of others unfortunately just don't exist anymore because their business has just been hit so hard by this whole period of time, then it raises a big question about what you're going out there to see and what you're taking the risk for. There's got to be change, I think. It's a shame. It's a huge shame. I think for a lot of us, these were real calendar events for us. We sort of planned parts of our year and how we were going to operate around perhaps going to these exhibitions, perhaps taking 1-2 members of the team out there. It's going to be difficult.
Yeah, I would. I think it will change like work is changing. I mean, I speak to a lot of our customers and say, what do you see happening? And people have discovered that you can actually work from home and be, in some instances at least, very effective. And they don't see why they should change that or they should take advantage. And I think the exhibition will be the same experience. A big concern is travel. Will our customers be there? Because we may be there, but they may not. And as you say, Darren, some of the companies may not be able to afford it because this is a severe beating that the industry is taking in terms of revenue. And whilst you may be able to borrow it, it still has to be paid back. So I think we have to proactively look at a different approach. The trade show may come back, may not. You have to proactively look at it and say, let's start by saying, what if it didn't? How would we run a business? Now, it would be really nice to share a beer with everyone, and I'm having my gin and tonic like you were at IBC, but the reality is that's a very expensive drink. let's look at something more imaginative. And for some of our customers, it's cheaper for me to visit them personally. And now we are a small business, so we can survive with fewer customers. We're not out there to conquer the world. But I think if people need to find us, they've found us not necessarily through the trade show, through other routes. So we will have to be imaginative. And I think you're right about webinars. If you do death by PowerPoint, nobody wants to attend them. You have to, this person has to say, why am I attending this webinar? And I don't think it'll be out of curiosity. I think it'll have to be, I'll learn something, or this is something I'm interested in. And these are promotional challenges that we as an industry, well, I think it's not just us, but for the context of the RTS, we as an industry have to improve on and learn.
I think the interesting thing about the travel, though, you just touched on it before previously talking about manufacturers. I think the tipping point with NAB came when certain major broadcasters said, no, we're not sending our staff. We're not allowing them to get on a plane. And that's the killer for any event. If the customer base turns around and goes, no, then the manufacturer base, we can pull out one by one, and the exhibition company will still try and go on. But if the customer base pulls out, absolutely, it's not going to happen.
I think with so over the years, for the more sort of local UK focused shows, we've exhibited, and slowly we've got more and more of our suppliers exhibiting on our stand. So I think it might be more of that, more of a sort of a local push, and have it that way, really. I mean, we've already seen that there's been a major time of innovation, really, in this industry to help people work from home and things like that. Necessity is the mother of invention. So I think there is going to be some sort of compromise, at least for a few years, definitely.
So does the panel have a view on, how long it might take before, well, even local shows can go ahead? What do you want to expand a little bit more on the pitfalls? Obviously, Darren was saying, the difficulties with companies and travel, and, that's been focused. But, what about the actual mechanics of having a show in a post-COVID-19 world? Do we all wear our masks and bump elbows? How would this work?
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I try and dream of this scenario and go home and tell my wife, darling, I'm just about to jump on a plane with 450 other people, and I'm going to go to the other side of the world, spend 10 hours on that plane, and I'm going to go to a place where there's been 100,000 people coming in, maybe more, from all sorts of different places. No, that's not going to go down well, is it? I think smaller shows are probably going to have a better advantage. I do think that we need to, there is a great need for the eye contact, for the human contact, because there's something about the way humans work that, yeah, we can put the product to one side. Yes, it's all going software, so we can check that online and have online demos. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to often is, can I trust you to deliver what you said you would? Can my team work with your team? And that will still need to happen somehow, and we will still need to visit our customers. But at bigger trade shows, it's often been that has driven a lot of the connection that then took us through the rest of the year, and that's been really useful. That is going to be a hard one. Taking a punt on it, I think 2021 is going to be very, very difficult. I really want us to be at the first show that takes place, because I think that's going to be a special one. I think it will be quite different. There will be social distancing. I'm sitting in Germany here, and I came out a week ago last Monday, and I was shocked at everybody. Bavarians are not really known for being Germanic in their rule abeyance, but everybody, and I mean everybody, is wearing a mask. And I think that will last some time once people get used to it. So I think 2021, from now till the end of 2021, we've got the masks on.
Yeah, I agree with Kieran. I think the foreseeable future, I think a vaccine is going to be the key. And I think events will still happen, but I agree with Kieran, it'll be the smaller events. I do think that it's going to be a challenge for all of us to justify travelling in the current climate, sitting on aeroplanes. But I do think that when things do open up a little bit, we're gonna have to have this. Well, until it opens up, the organisers have got to come up with more of a virtual offering than just a digital offering, because that's already being done so much anyway. And I think when it does open up, there will be still social distancing in place. And also, I think that any organiser that doesn't have the hybrid option in place will really struggle.
It's quite interesting because, so in my beginning to return to the office and my colleagues beginning to come back into the office, it's interesting to see how different people react to going back out again. And it's not quite as new for everyone as it was a few weeks ago, but I think there are some exceptions to this. But generally speaking, younger people tend to be much more gung-ho because they believe the risks are much lower to them. Older people who have perhaps family members or their own health issues, less so. And I just wonder whether we're just going to see in society generally groups of people are frankly happy to go to the pub, happy to go to restaurants, happy to go to shows and exhibitions, and other groups of people who really, even after quite long periods of time, just simply aren't interested anymore and are looking for ways to, I guess, stay safe. And whether that sort of has an impact, it may allow new people to come forward within their organizations because they're willing to do things that some of their colleagues aren't. And equally, maybe some manufacturers will rise up where previously they've been unable to because they're perhaps willing to do things that some of their competitors aren't. I think it's time will tell, but I think it'll effectively be a new way to compete almost as to what risk are you willing to take in a post-COVID world?
I would say, for me personally, I've been a bit boring. We've self-isolated. I'm in a certain age group. I should be cycling, according to Boris. But we take a poll every week. Do we want to go back to the office, or are we happy to carry on? And the relevance of this is everyone's happy to carry on and work from home because it's not affecting our productivity. So if I were to now go away and say, what have I done with my customers? And a lot of them are in isolation, more available. So we call them, we have online meetings with them and so on. And that's been very successful. So my next step would be not to go to a show. It would be to sit there and say, which country can I visit where I can meet my customers one-to-one and face-to-face? As you say, Kieran, that's still how you do business. So that's not going to go away. And then I would look at a show. I mean, that's a personal thing, and it's not based on risk, it's based on uncertainty. There's a difference. The reason why we don't step out is not because we don't want to take a risk. We don't know what this damn thing is capable of doing. And, you know, I've scoured the net, and there's all sorts of opinions and ideas. And somebody who wants to die because they'd rather not wear a mask isn't my cup of tea. I mean, I'm, you know, as I said, if you can carry on running your business successfully and efficiently, having adopted to what our environment is, there is no rush to go back to the old ways because that's what we are familiar with.
I think there's an added benefit in online communication. I think, going back to the human factor, when you're standing in front of people, you can and and you can delay and you can prevaricate and you can talk around a subject. Some of those items are useful in how we interact when we're physically together. But when you've got to get your point across on a video, you've got to be to the point. You've got to think about it. You've got to work hard at it. And that, I think, has forced a lot of us to really work on the message, really work on, well, what is it about our solution that really is truly different? I know we do that in marketing generally in the first place, and in the sales, you have the elevator pitch that people will give, but I think it has started to focus the mind a lot more instead of waiting for the monthly or the biannual or the twice yearly cycle of big trade shows or even smaller local events. Getting your message across on videos a lot more succinctly is really, really important.
I think another thing as well is it's kind of, all of this is kind of showing the sort of human side of corporates and, you know, small companies, large companies. You know, it's very rare for me to phone someone now and ask how are they, and they answer, you know, truthfully, and things like that. And I'm so looking forward to seeing people face to face, having some meetings, you know, finishing some up in a pub maybe, but just now isn't the time. And this year it was meant to be my first time I went to NAB as well. So yeah, it's shocker of a year to pick, eh?
Yes, I think a number of people will be thinking, I'll have to get out of my trainers. And people have been doing meetings, obviously wearing their pajamas and all sorts of things that have been, a sort of result of lockdown. Probably things about people you wouldn't have necessarily seen if they'd been all spiffed up for their show booth. We've had quite a bit of chat and Q&A going on in parallel with this. In fact, quite a debate going on in the webinar chat. So I'll pick up on a few pieces. But first of all, I'd just like to sort of do a kind of, round up poll of our panelists. What I would like to know is, certainly myself, a lot of people in February, March, when NAB finally got cancelled, a lot of people were saying, that's the death of shows, it'll all be online. Everything was going to digital marketing and Zoom, what then became Zoom meetings, but WebEx, Blue Jeans, pick your, Teams, pick whatever. But as lockdown has gone on, has your opinion on shows shifted and changed? Basically I'd like to know is, will they return as they were? Will they return but changed? Or will they not return and it'll all be online? So which of those three would you sort of come down on if you had to pick?
I think they'll return, but I think they'll be significantly changed. I think in the next year, there's going to be, let's just take the bigger shows or the medium-sized shows, fewer customers sending their staff, fewer manufacturers sending their staff, fewer staff saying, hey, I want to go and be in a place with 50,000 other people. And that will force the whole scenario into a different circle. It'll also change the circle for the shareholders of those organizations. And that's an important shift that it's going to have, the RTS being one of them. And I dread to think what effect that's going to have around the world. I think that over the next year, once we do discover that way, Darren, like you mentioned, to connect better with customers out there who we know, or even find the ones that we didn't know, you do ask yourself the question, what's the purpose of going back to the trade show? If we can do that throughout the whole of the year, the purpose of the trade show was to network and to meet. Does it then change into becoming a pure networking event? If so, then why does it need to be in a major exhibition center? And those questions, I think, are very, very valid. But none of us are going to have what I call this 2020 hindsight or hindsight 2020. It'll be interesting to look back at the end of 2021 and see what actually came true.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I think that I think we have to understand that we're in a totally different situation that we've ever been in before. We, as companies, have to adapt to that. I think show organisers have to adapt to that very quickly. And I think the key to it is what you said, Kieran, is whatever they do and however way they do it on a virtual platform or digital, it's more about the interaction. when we start, or the physical events that are going ahead or do go ahead, then they're really going to have to look at it very differently, whether they're invitation only, whether they, you have to limit numbers, whether they do time slots, or I'm not saying that those are all necessarily right, but I really think that they're going to have to do things very differently in the way that we interact, maybe more pre-show. I know that there are companies that I work with that won't turn up at a trade show without having so many meetings pre-booked anyway. If one of my companies on the pavilion turns up and puts the finger in the air to see which way the wind's blowing and hope that the people walk past, then they might as well throw their money away. So I think trade shows will come back. Whether they'll get back to where they were, it might take quite a lot of time, but they will. I agree with Kieran. They will be very, very different. And those show organisers are going to have to work a hell of a lot harder than they have done in the past.
Can I throw in on top of that, Mark? I actually feel a bit disappointed. I'm impressed with what Broadcast Asia are doing, because it's reasonably priced, and there's a lot of services for it. But at the end of the day, a trade show's job is to bring professional buyers together with professional sellers. That's the only reason we're there. Yeah, of course, we like the networking. We like meeting customers face to face, but we can go and do that in a bar anywhere. But the idea of bringing people who truly have an idea to change a workflow or to change a solution area, whether it be production, playout, or whatever area, together with those people who have the solutions for them. This isn't a widget show. This is a proper, true buying and selling event where you're bringing buyers and sellers together. And I was rather hoping that the organizations who have some of the biggest databases of the customer base around the world would actually come up with more innovative ways of bringing those two parties together.
Yeah, and I think, again, I agree with you, Kieran, that actually there's going to have to be more thought that goes into that by all show organisers. I think having a website with just videos on and a little bit of content, I'm not sure. I think that may work for some companies, but I certainly think that talking to people about Broadcast Asia, it's more about the interaction and the live demos and the business matching and things like that, rather than just being a profile on a website.
See, to my mind, this is the ultimate opportunity for the channel and the reseller network. I think this presents their perfect opportunity. I mean, some of them used to run, I think they used to call them road shows, where they perhaps go around the country with a variety of products that they were representing to go show them to the customer base. But I think that's the opportunity here. I see manufacturers need to make sure that their chosen partners are the right partners, and that their resellers, their channel is doing what they need. And then that channel needs to get out there and effectively replace the show, create small events, create the opportunity for people to network while showing their products. I think they can be done in a safe way. And the channel then becomes more than the box shifters that they are sometimes regarded as. Yes, I'm sure some form of show will return at some point. And again, the whole conference piece around that might help drive that a bit. But it will be massively changed. I think it's inevitable.
My view is that we won't wait for the show organizers to take the initiative. We're going to take the initiative ourselves, because we have been analyzing the return on investment in our marketing, and it's really, really shocking how poor it is at a trade show. I mean, it's great to socialize. I love it too. But you look at the cold numbers, and there are easier and cheaper ways to do this. So the shows may return, and also we have to commit to a show. I mean, all of us had to pay a price for the show being cancelled. So we have to commit to this a year in advance. So why would we do that right now? So I think I still maintain that we have to find a different way of doing it, and we will find it more innovative ways of networking as well. I think simply going back because that's what it was, and we love the networking, we love that is not how a business moves forward. I mean, you know, we've all had to innovate our products to keep up with what's available out there. So we have, I think I would encourage all the manufacturers and the organizers to actually have a debate and actually talk to us and say, how can we make this different? And if we're looking after our P&L and the show organizers are looking after theirs, and therefore thinking that we'll work in our interests only, then the shows will fail.
Okay. Any last deep thoughts? We've got quite a bit of commentary on the chat, which I'd just like to sort of pick up on one or two. Jenny Marwick-Evans has mentioned death by Zoom, which obviously I think some people have come across over the last days, and also is mentioning Broadcast Asia as a really good way of getting into Asia. I think Kieran mentioned that it's a pretty good package. And Barbara Lang, hi Barbara, mentioning the SIMPTE annual technical conference is using a platform for conference and exhibition, so that could be quite interesting. And I'm just sort of picking and choosing here because there are many comments about beer, which is quite exciting. And also mention, as the panel have, of the possibility of sort of a hybrid solution. And some people picking up on the smaller shows idea. Because certainly, you know, as the panel mentioned, you know, it's a little bit difficult if you get on a plane and go to another country and then find that you can't get back and your health insurance has been cancelled. That sort of thing tends to focus the mind a little bit. Yeah, there's lots and lots of comments here, and lots of people joining in, and obviously singing along with our choir. But I think the end of our webinar is approaching, and it remains for me to thank all of our intrepid panelists for taking part. It's been most interesting to hear your different views, and we hope that it's been enjoyable for the attendees out there. So with that, I will say thank you to you all once again. The recording will be available for people if you want to tell them that this is a nice thing to watch. And I hope to see you all soon, either in person or virtually. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Have a good
Thanks,
evening.
guys. Yeah.
Take care.